Was the Apple Cup a bad game or a sign of more?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming up. We're going to be talking about Washington's offensive identity, some of the things that Jedd Fisch had to say about it at his press conference today, before Big Ten play, which starts this weekend, which is still weird to say. We're going to talk about how much Demond Williams might play going forward, with some things Jedd Fisch said about him, with what we saw from him in the Apple Cup. But we have to keep talking about this Apple Cup, because really the question on everybody's mind is this the start of something more, or was this just an aberration? Was just one bad game?
So it's clearly not an aberration, because we saw it not at Washington, but Jedd has kind of had similar games to this. So it's in Jedd's raison d'etre to have a game like this. The other side of the equation is it hasn't really become a trend in terms of he doesn't necessarily make those same mistakes game after game after game and let it become a snowball effect. And so in that respect, again, it's question half answered. You can take the glass half full or half empty approach, because really this weekend against Northwestern is a perfect opportunity to prove that it was just an aberration, that Wazoo had a great game plan. And if you think about it, Jake Dickert's known what Jedd Fisch has done the last 3 years at Arizona. Granted, won the first 2 games against them and then got blown out last season. So he's beaten Jedd twice, now 3 times. So it's not like this is a miracle on 32nd Street that he figured out how to win. Again, different talent on each of those 2 Arizona teams that he won with, because it was the first 2 seasons after the Sumlin debacle. And obviously the talent at Arizona in those 2 seasons was not what it is at Washington. But that said, this team is only 3 games in. And I think Jedd keeps repeating that for a reason. It's like, hey, look, we brought the basically entire offensive staff, but as a collective, as a team, as a unit, we're all still playing together. This is our 3rd game together. So it's understandable that there's, I guess, some kinks that still need to be worked out. And then when you marry that with a coach that knows how to game plan for you and actually kind of baited you into that 4th down call, for being honest, you just got to tip the cap to Jake Dickert. That's what he did. Tip the cap to John Mateer, tip the cap to Dickert. Didn't necessarily bag on his team, which, again, he could have. Again, he addressed the penalties, addressed all the other things we've talked about. But to me, I don't think it's necessarily a sign of things to come, but I'm not necessarily selling the house to bet that either.
So it's with the penalties, that's a trend. Yes. That is a trend where Washington's up to 30 penalties over 3 games, which is not pretty. 10 of them have been 15-yard penalties. That can't happen. That's a trend. That's something I went back and wrote about over a little bit on Huskies Wire, where those are numbers that need to be fixed. That's something that through 3 games, that's a trend. In terms of the bad play calling on the goal line, all the other things I think go into that, surrounding that. I think that's an aberration. I do. Where I feel that Jedd Fisch's track record is long enough to show that there are going to be games like this that are aberrations, where, I know you pointed out to me after we finished recording our Monday show. I talked to our buddy Alex Katzen about it as well, where the USC game last year, there were similar questionable play calls. And it feels like it's something that has happened once a year, where it's, what was the thinking there? What was the thought process there? And, Jedd tried to defend the play call a little bit at Monday's press conference. I didn't necessarily agree with his wording there, where you can just tell from the start, as soon as the ball was snapped, that the play was kind of doomed. But I do think that in terms of what his track record is as a play caller, that there's enough to say, and it's something we're certainly going to talk about when we talk about the offensive identity too, that there's enough here to say, all right, if, let's say they come out and they beat Northwestern and then they beat Rutgers, I'm willing to kind of look back on this game and say, yeah, maybe that was just a blip on the radar, and you can't write it off. I'm not saying to write this game off at all. But you can definitely look back on it after, let's say they have 2 nice wins and say, all right, yeah, maybe there's still things to be concerned about, but it was just a little bit of a mishap.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into Big Ten play, it's going to be curious to see how many teams can Northwestern replicate what Dicker did. And I'm glad you mentioned that the play had no chance. That's why I asked Dick. I stuck around for the Jake Dicker press conference after the Apple Cup, and I wanted to ask him, like, were you surprised by that call? And what was your assessment on Jonah Coleman's day in general? And Jake was like, well, without giving you the total answer and my entire game plan, we kind of forced him into that look. That was a look that we wanted to give him. It's a look, and by the way, it's a look Jed got earlier in the game.
Yeah.
So Jake showed him that same look and baited him into it because, in Dickert's words, he put a twist on it. So meaning they changed a couple of different things on the play, which again, you could see that the line blew it up. Jonah had, even if Will pitches that ball 3 seconds before that just to get Jonah the ball, 0 chance he scored. He's probably taking a 4-yard loss, and that's no slight to Jonah. Just the amount of Wazoo linemen in that corner at that point, plus yardage. There's no way Jonah was making that, short of Jonah deciding to pull a trick pass and throw it to Denzel or Giles. Which, you know what, I almost thought as that play was going down, that was what was happening, but then there was nobody. It was kind of quick. I'm like, oh, hey, maybe they're trying to do it quick and pitch back or something. And it was, oh no, you're actually pitching it. You were really doing. Oh, okay, game's over.
Yeah,
and the other side of that coin is, Christian Capel, I think, was the one that asked him, hey, did you kind of regret taking that timeout and also in doing so costing yourself the original play and the extra timeout that you could have stopped Wazoo on the next possession, which ended up being moved because 2 offside penalties negated that, and the kneel down, the rest is history. It just seemed like kind of a 6-1, half a dozen the other game from a coaching perspective from start to finish. Now, Jed, sure. Because I agree with you. There was some, the Demond answer was one where I'm like, I'm not going down because we're going to talk about that more in the second segment. There were so many answers that I was like, okay, I disagree, but on some level I can see a principle for it. Like on some level you're right, but in that level you're wrong. And to me, it was, okay, is Jed just saying this because, what else is there to say? I guess the only thing you can say is credits him for not doubling down and saying, oh, no, that was the right play call. We should have, because, again, he kind of did by saying, well, we didn't execute it. We didn't get it blocked right. It's like, even if you get that blocked right, I still don't see in a world.
I agree.
Unless you're saying it's perfectly executed where you got a hat on a hat and Wazoo just doesn't show up on the play, sure. But the entire 58 minutes of that game showed you Wazoo was going to show up on 4th down.
Yeah, and that's one thing where, when I just look back on it, those are the things that need to correct it. Where looking back at throughout the first 2 games and just what we've seen from Fish in the past is he's going to find a way to get that right. Where, especially if you look at what last season was for him, he's going to find ways to make adjustments and get it right. But you want to hope that it's not the start of a trend where, if we see something similar, then I would get really worried. But I think that right now you can't harp too much on it and just say, because I've seen everything like, oh, Fish shouldn't be calling plays where he's done it for the last 3 years. Like let's tamp that out. If there's an entire season of problems, there's maybe a discussion to be had, but after one bad game, let's not act like that's where we should be.
Who are you turning to in that situation? This is like, I'm not equating it to 2021 John Donovan when you got rid of the OC who was a lame duck OC, but it's not like Junior was any better at calling plays. And Durham Cato, I know, had a hand in that as well. And, it wasn't like that was any different. I'm not equating it to the same, but you want Jimmy Doherty to call plays? He's the eye in the sky. He's helping Jed make the correct play call. So in a sense, it wouldn't be any different there. And Brennan, as the offensive line coach, has already got enough things to deal with the offensive line. It's getting better, as Jed said. But, I don't think Brennan would necessarily be the one to call the play. Maybe he calls a power run in that situation. So maybe Brennan should have got that call. I don't know. But to me, I will say real quick to kind of wrap this whole thing up and going back on the penalties. I know I'm kind of going back a little bit here. Jed did finish 95th in the country at Arizona in penalties last season. So his teams are rather – and now, again, UW right now is 130th in the country. Yeah. You only got 4 teams more penalized than you through the first 3 games. So it's actually gotten worse, if anything. But I don't know what is going to be fixing that. I truly don't.
Well, Lars, it's not something that would fix it, but looking into the future, how much are we going to see Demond Williams for the rest of the year? Which we'll get to right after message from our friends over at Roy. Hey, Husky fans, have you heard about Roy? It stands for Return on You. And it's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. As you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes, and Roy changes the NIL game for fans. Here's why Roy is different. It directly supports players, where Roy allows fans to directly back their favorite college athletes. With Roy, fans can play a key role in shaping the future of their favorite teams, while athletes maximize their name, image, and likeness potential. And you get exclusive content access when fans contribute to a successful campaign. They receive access to exclusive content from the athlete, such as their announcement decision, behind-the-scenes footage, and other personal reflections, all of which are available only to fans who supported the athlete. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Get the Roy app for iOS or Android and start making an impact on your favorite team. Use referral code LOCKEDON for an opportunity to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for more details. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. So, Lars, when we look at the rest of the season, Jed was very complimentary of Demond Williams. He referenced where when he's on the field, Washington averages 9 yards on the ground per attempt with him in the game. But when we look at that, is that, him saying he's going to play more, where we saw him get that entire final drive before halftime? It feels like, I don't know if that's the max that we're going to see him play, or just the amount of snaps that he took against Wazoo, but it certainly feels like we're getting close to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I asked Jed, what's the ratio? And he said 80-20. I tend to agree with that, but I would not be surprised if it becomes 70-30. And that's not a slight to Will. I just think it's clear that Jed wants to get Demond going in some way, shape, or form. And Demond, to his credit, 9-12, as Jed said, has a passing touchdown, hasn't thrown a pick. Again, hasn't been perfect, and you're not expecting a true freshman, especially in the situations that he's come in, to be perfect, but he's gotten plus yardage more often than not. The problem is it's almost, I disagree with Jed when he said, well, why would we bring him in for a couple of drives? Like, why not give him the full drive to let him cook? Like, that to me would almost make more sense. Now, again, I understand the packages, but it's almost playing into the, well, we have to keep Demond in for an extra play to make it look like we're not just running him, which I get, but keep him in for the whole drive. Give him a fair drive. And that's why the non-conference is perfect for that. Doing it in the Big Ten is going to be a little bit harder because either you're counting on either getting blown out or on the other end of a blowout. Otherwise, you're getting those packages for Demond. And in that case, the situations in that, it still seems like they need to be cleaned up. And it's not necessarily just on Demond, but, we've seen some of the snaps be a little bit iffy, both on Landon and D'Angelo in that regard. And so it's just, to me, it's playing with fire, but it's also kind of like, well, when that fire ignites, it could be really big. And that's kind of the double-edged sword of why you want to play Demond. And that's why I was an advocate for saying, and I still am, Demond will get more than 6 games. I was on record saying that in the summer. I'm still on record saying that now, and I firmly believe that, despite what Jed was trying to push back throughout fall camp for this reason. But the execution of it isn't there, and it's not necessarily a Demond. I mean, the check. I will say the combination.
The missed check down of Jonah.
The missed check down was that the screen that Jed also referred to as saying we missed the screen earlier in the game? Because that was also that's what I assumed was a different call. But either way, Demond misses him there. Don't get the first down. He got a punt. That was a drive killer, momentum killer, but it wasn't necessarily just on Demond in that situation. Like, I don't know. I question a little bit the play call there, the decision. I don't know. It just kind of speaks to, I see why Demond wants to come to the game, and you see why they want to get him in the game. But the execution and the follow through still is lacking, full commitment in that regard.
So one of the things that makes this really tough and, is certainly going to spark things on Twitter and all of our social media is that Will Rogers has been really successful this year. He's thrown for 825 yards, completed almost 79% of his passes, is top 3 in the country in completion percentage, and hasn't thrown an interception. Where that's one thing this offense has not done. It has not turned the ball over outside of the Demond fumble, which, is just, he tried to make a play, true freshman moment. Those things happen. That's, you'd rather have it happen now than when he's a senior. When I look at just what this can be going forward, I'm certainly an advocate for the Demond packages. I think that he's electric when he's in the game. Having him in there for, those read options, whatever, putting him in the game it's certainly what Jed wants to do in the future. That certainly seems to be where this offense is heading. But when you look at, just the momentum of when he's put in, I think that's what needs a little bit of work where, it doesn't seem like, oh, we need to get Demond in right now. It just feels like, oh, this is the spot where you want to use him, where, the one I certainly I look at is against Eastern Michigan. When it's 3rd and 3, you put him in backed way up, and then there's the bad snap that turns it into a 4th and 19. Where those are the ones where obviously you look back on that after the fact, and it's easy to be a revisionist and say, oh yeah, why was he in there? But it's just the down and distance, the situation where there have been a couple of them. It's, oh, that's interesting. Demond's coming in now, where it feels like the red zone is a spot where maybe you want to use him in there a little bit more often, but it just feels like it's just almost random, or at least that's how it feels, where it's like, oh yeah, it's 2nd and 6. All right, time for Demond, where I don't feel that's the best thing for his development, where I think it's, you want to make it a little more structured where, I'm sure there's more of a game plan than obviously we're aware of, but when I look at it, it feels a little bit like, ooh, I like this play call right now. Let's get him in there.
It feels like I'm smart enough to make this happen and then being half right on that, where sometimes it works. And again, that's kind of the genius of Jed and the bonus of Demond. But then there's the other side of that coin where it doesn't work. And we're not even counting the true freshman plays or things like it doesn't make sense. Like, we talked about in the first half, bringing him in for that the final drive in the first half where you got 45, 50 seconds somewhere in that ballpark, and you're just trying to get to midfield. Yeah, I remember telling you, sitting next to each other, like, that checks out. Him scrambling, that makes sense because he's got better legs than Will, even though Will showed a decent amount of leg on Saturday. It was more about, okay, Demond's the better runner in that situation to get you into midfield. But the first drive, the previous sequence, that's what didn't make sense, where you have the 2nd down, you come in and get the 3rd down, and then miss the 3rd down, got a punt. And to me, especially when you're ahead in the game, that was the other bone-scratching part of that, is you're leading in the game. Momentum is theoretically at your sails. It's probably nullified at that point, but it was kind of 50-50. But you still have the lead and a chance to, with Will, a 5th-year senior. That's the other thing. You're not talking about – it's almost in a way kind of like what, pulling Jake Browning for Jake Haener on steroids, in the sense that it's not the same result where, Haener throws a pick 6 and lose the game. Separate issue with that. Demond hasn't thrown a pick. And the fumble, obviously, he was, at the end of a game with 21-point win. It doesn't matter. But it's still the principle of why there? Why that? Then, oh, no, we see why. Like, Haener ended up being a good quarterback. Demond will be a very good quarterback down the road and play a role for this team this year. But it's how is he used, when, and why? Because to me, it's like, either are you doing it to show that you can do this, or because you're not getting what you need in the run or from Will, and you're trying to spark something. Neither one of the three were the actual choice there.
Yeah, and that's where it's kind of confusing, where, I feel you can say the same thing about other freshmen and other just packages too, where you talk about that Audric Harris play down the goal line, where it's like, yeah, getting him in the game is fine. Getting him in the game in that scenario, I don't necessarily have a problem with. But that fade route when you have Denzel Boston and Jeremiah Hunter just feels weird. And that's just kind of how it just feels the same way to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's the right route, wrong, and it's not not for Audric, but it's just like, why not put Denzel in that situation, or why not put Jeremiah Hunter, or God forbid, Kaleki Latu at 6'7"? Like, we're talking about the red zone. It's like you have 2 6'4" guys, Jeremiah at 6'2". You know, you got the bodies to make it work. We saw it in fall camp, and just for whatever reason, has not even been approached this season.
Yeah, that's where it gets confusing, because they did rep that. They've repped it a lot. We know it's something that's in the playbook because we saw it in Arizona too, where we know that I don't want to say a signature, because that's not what it is, but it's just something that certainly works for them, and they've found ways to make it work. But the fact that that's not like that's just not where the ball went, felt like it's kind of just Jed saying, all right, yeah, we know we want to get these freshmen on the field. This is how we're going to utilize them, which felt a little confusing. I think that these are all things that can get straightened out as we move into Big Ten play, where I feel, that's certainly going to be a ball for Denzel. The same situation happens against Northwestern. But Lars, one thing that also really needs to get straightened out is Washington's offensive identity, which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at FanDuel, because you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And, I said it the other day, and I'm going to say it again. I really would check out those Seahawks odds in the NFC West on FanDuel to win that division, especially after the news that Deebo Samuel went down. I would love to see Kenneth Walker get back soon, but the Seahawks, they look solid. We love seeing Ryan Grubb calling the shots there. DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith-Njigba, they looked absolutely fantastic. DK too. If there are all pro odds, or maybe leads the league in touchdowns at this point, I'd go check those out over on FanDuel as well. So Lars, you asked Jedd Fisch on Monday about his offensive identity, as to what he's going to look at. And I kind of liked his answer, where he talked about, we finished 20th in the country in offense over the last couple of years, that they're 8th in explosive plays right now. And I heard balanced and explosive, because he set a goal. He said every week we're going to try to throw for 300 yards and we're trying to run for 200. And it's exactly, it's something we talked about on the Monday show as well. With the stable of talent that he has at running back, at receiver, with what Will has shown to be, I'm okay with that. I think there are things to improve on, like, taking more deep shots, but I think that that's a solid route for this offense to take.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I want to take the other angle of that, because really the answer, that was the gist of it, where you come away with, okay, read between the lines. You like Will, you want to get the running game going a little bit more, but you didn't really talk about being physical up front, which is what you talk about in the Big Ten, being, hey, we have a physical offensive line that we feel can match up, and that's why we want to, use the run to set up the pass, get some play action in there, which would be a true statement, because that's kind of what's been their success this season. You get the run game going. But when you mentioned the 300-200 stat that Jedd put out there, they've only done that. They threw for 300 yards technically with one quarterback once. They've hit 300 yards in passing offense twice in back-to-back games against Eastern Michigan and Washington State. They only ran for 200 plus against Weber State. That's it. They ran for 185 against Eastern Michigan and 135, I want to say, against Washington State. So you're trending backwards in one regard, and you're trending upwards in another regard. And Jedd, I think, said 57-43 on the pass to run situation, percentages of how many they've thrown versus how many they've run. The numbers that Jedd did throw out, top 20, number 20 in scoring offense or whatever it was, number 15 in yards per play. So you're getting 7-8 yards per play, but it almost doesn't feel like it, where it's like you either get 7 or 8 / 15 to 20, because that's a lot of what it is. It's either 20 plus or 2-0. It really feels like. And now, to their credit, we're talking about the Decker touchdowns. A lot of these big the Giles catches, a lot of them have 15, 20 plus, which feeds into just, hey, we got big plays. We're one of the top 10 in big plays. It's like, right, but what have you put it all together is my question. I don't think necessarily we've seen the fullest UW offense when it's all clicking together.
So I certainly agree with you. And, you bringing up where the rushing yards have been is a fantastic point. When I look at it, I think, why not shoot for 200 a week with the guys that you have there? I'm fine with that. We know Jed sets big goals. Reaching them is another thing, where hearing that and saying that's the message, that's what you're shooting for, I'm okay with that. That's one where I hear that and I say, all right, that's fine. Like, it's the same thing with the receivers where, Will hadn't thrown for 300 yards before the Apple Cup. And it was something where it felt like he could reach that very, very easily if there was a little bit more emphasis placed on the pass. Where now that we've seen that, great. Love to see that. But when I look at this offense as a whole, I think it's attainable to do one of those things each week, because doing both those things every week in the Big Ten is not going to happen. I mean, let's be real. But setting those goals and saying, this is what we expect, this is what we want, that's fine. Because that's just the whole point. Where, every single team thinks that they can win a national championship before the season starts. Like, that's part of football. That's what it is. But when I look at this and I really get into, now that it's Big Ten play, we're not necessarily going to see probably as deep of rotation in some of these different spots. I think that one of them is going to be attainable each week. I feel like more often than not, it's going to be passing for 300 yards. And, when you talk about the explosive plays, having Jonah Coleman and Cameron Davis and Adam Muhammad in the backfield is going to be perfect to play off of that. And the 57-43, I expect that to stay somewhat similar. I think we might see a little bit more rushing out of this team, but what we need to see is more, because you referenced the Decker touchdowns. That's great. You referenced the two Giles catches. That's great. But outside of that, I feel like we haven't seen a whole lot of deep shots taken. And of course, that's something that I don't think Jed wants to do a whole bunch of when we reference Will Rogers' completion percentage. But I think it's something that with the playmakers that you have on offense, it's worth sacrificing his completion percentage a little bit if you want to stretch the defense out a little bit more and to really just kind of lean into this narrative that, as I said over on Huskies Wire, of a balanced and explosive offense, which is possible.
You have faith in the offensive line to hold up for 3 or 4 seconds?
I mean, that's fair. But that's a fair point. It's a fair question.
No, it's a fair question. I think that's the answer, is if you had faith in your offensive line, you would do it. I don't. And again, what we saw in the Apple Cup, as much as Jed wants to say the offensive line played fine, it's like, okay, fine didn't win you the game. Fine got you blown up on 4th and 1 on at least one occasion. And, let's be real here. It wasn't like that UW was, stout in the trenches throughout all 4 quarters. I mean, they had some good moments, and obviously, when Max came in, they had the scoring drive and things like that. But it just, to me, the offensive line still doesn't feel fully as confident, and I'm wondering when that's going to click, because I feel like when the offensive line sets that tone, then everything else will click, because then you can have Will sit in the pocket for 2 or 3 seconds, find Denzel on a deep shot, knowing he doesn't have to just throw up a prayer, because the 45-yarder to Giles was a prayer. If we're being real, that was a prayer. Like, that was, I mean, planned-ish, but, Giles did a lot of work on that to make that thing actually come down.
But it's still I think you're kind of missing the point. It's even in the scenarios where you don't get the best protection, you can still trust your guys to win one-on-one is what I'm saying, which is especially when, we've talked about Jeremiah not getting a whole ton of targets. What's one thing that Will Rogers has talked about him being really good at? It's going up and winning 50-50 balls. We know Denzel Boston can do that too. That's kind of what I'm saying is, the protection hasn't been stellar throughout the season, but it's something where you don't always need 4 seconds to do that.
Right. No, you're not wrong. No, I'm with you. I think they should take more deep shots, but there's clearly a reason why they're not. And now part of it is you can say, well, Will's game and bread and butter is, 5 yards and in. Okay, but that's really not, because we've seen him hit 20 plus consistently this season. So to me, it's just how much I want to know the conversation between Will and Jed. Like, it seems like, I'm not saying there's some tension there, because Will's a good soldier and all that, coach's kid and all that, so he's not going to ruffle any feathers. But I think even Will might have some thoughts on this offense and what might make it click a little bit better. And part of that would be, again, let me get some shots to Jeremiah. Let me at least get a shot. Let me try it early. And if it doesn't work, fine. Then we'll go back to what you want. But let me at least have that shot to set that tone. Because if you hit some big ones early, and we've seen it similar to the run game, where if you get a couple big runs going, that cracks the will and eventually breaks the wall, which you can come out in the second half and kind of carry the momentum through. Washington never was able to attain that. Now Jed was like, well, we scored on the second drive and, got field goal. It's like, okay, great. Yeah. But was it convincing? Because everything after that did not help get that lead or keep that lead. So to me, it's cool. You got 10 points in the first 3 drives. What did you do after that?
Right.
What did you do in the last 3 drives?
And what was the biggest thing all there? Penalties. You have to get those under control, or else this whole conversation really is just somewhat null and void. And Lars, with that being said, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. And now for your second listen, you should go check out the Locked On College Football Podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, our guy Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football down below so you don't need to search. It's on YouTube or wherever else you get your podcast. And with that being said, if you enjoy what we got to offer, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.